At 2:30 a.m., David Carter sat in his home office researching the survival rates of helicopter crashes over forests. Upstairs, his pregnant wife Sarah slept peacefully, completely unaware that the man she trusted with her life was planning her murder. What started as the perfect suburban marriage was about to become a nightmare 800 feet above the ground. Sarah thought she was going on a romantic baby moon helicopter tour. David had calculated it would be the perfect way to stage an accident and collect $3 million in life insurance. But what David didn't count on was Sarah's intelligence, her preparation, and her incredible will to survive. This is the true story of betrayal, survival, and justice that shocked an entire nation. And it all began with a single helicopter ride that was supposed to end in tragedy. The blue glow of David Carter's laptop screen illuminated his face at 2:30 in the morning as he sat in his home office, scrolling through helicopter accident statistics with methodical precision. The search history on his browser painted a chilling picture of premeditation. Survival rates helicopter crashes over forest. Average time to find missing person in wilderness. Accidental death insurance claim processing time. And most disturbing of all, how to stage helicopter accident. Upstairs, his wife Sarah slept peacefully in their king-sized bed, 7 months pregnant with their first child, completely unaware that the man she loved and trusted was researching the best way to murder her. Her phone lay on the nightstand, still displaying her last Instagram post from earlier that evening. A glowing maternity photo with the caption, "7 months and counting, can't wait to meet our little miracle. Feeling so blessed with my amazing husband David." The post had received over 300 likes and dozens of heart-eyed emoji comments from friends and family. To the outside world, Sarah and David Carter represented the American dream, a successful tech entrepreneur and his beautiful teacher wife, expecting their first child in a picture-perfect suburban home in Maplewood, Ohio. But social media facades can hide the darkest truths. David rubbed his bloodshot eyes and bookmarked another article about insurance payouts for accidental deaths. Tomorrow morning, he would convince Sarah to take that romantic helicopter tour over the Appalachian Mountains he had been subtly suggesting for weeks. She deserved a special baby moon memory before their child arrived, he would tell her. But the truth was far more sinister than Sarah could ever imagine. David needed Sarah gone, and he needed it to look like a tragic accident. 3 months earlier, life had seemed idyllic for the Carters. Sarah Williams Carter taught third grade at Maplewood Elementary School, where she had worked for 6 years and was beloved by students, parents, and colleagues alike. Her classroom walls were covered with thank you letters from former students and their families. Parents specifically requested their children be placed in Miss Sarah's class, knowing she had a gift for making every child feel special and capable. Her personal Instagram account, followed by over 2,000 people in their small Ohio community, showcased what appeared to be a fairy tale life. There were photos of romantic date nights with David at upscale restaurants, vacation pictures from their honeymoon in Napa Valley, and most recently, a series of stunning maternity photos that had gone viral locally. Sarah glowed in every image, her hand protectively cradling her growing belly. David's arms wrapped around her from behind, with a smile that looked genuine to anyone who did not know better. The nursery preparation posts had garnered particular attention. Sarah had documented every step of creating the perfect space for their baby, painting the walls a soothing sage green, assembling a white convertible crib, and arranging shelves filled with classic children's books. She had even created a Pinterest board called Baby Carter's First Home that other expectant mothers in the area had started copying. David played his role perfectly in this digital performance. As the founder and CEO of a cryptocurrency investment platform called Secure Chain Technologies, he appeared to be living the millennial entrepreneurial dream. His LinkedIn profile boasted of rapid company growth and innovative blockchain solutions. His own Instagram showcased the lifestyle his supposed success afforded. A white Tesla Model S in their driveway, expensive suits from premium brands, and photos from tech conferences in Silicon Valley and Austin. But behind the carefully curated social media presence, David's world was collapsing in spectacular fashion. Secure Chain Technologies was hemorrhaging money faster than David could hide it from his investors and board members. The cryptocurrency market crash had wiped out 90% of their platform's value, leaving clients furious and demanding refunds the company could not provide. Class action lawsuits were already being filed, and federal regulators had begun sniffing around their business practices. Even worse, David had been secretly gambling away their personal savings at underground poker games and online sports betting sites, convinced he could win back their losses and save both his company and his marriage. What had started as casual $500 bets had escalated into desperate $50,000 wagers on basketball games and horse races he knew nothing about. The loan sharks were no longer subtle in their threats. Vincent Torino, a man with connections to organized crime families in Cleveland, had made it clear that David had exactly 30 days to pay back the $200,000 he owed, plus interest. The alternative, Vincent had explained with chilling calm, would involve Sarah experiencing a very unfortunate accident. That conversation had planted the seed of an idea in David's mind. If Sarah were to die in a tragic accident before Vincent's deadline, David would inherit the $3 million life insurance policy he had secretly purchased 6 months earlier. $3 million would pay off Vincent, save his company, and give David a fresh start with his mistress, a 25-year-old marketing consultant named Jessica, whom he had been seeing for 8 months. The insurance policy had been surprisingly easy to obtain. David had told Sarah it was a responsible step for expectant parents, protection for their growing family in case anything happened to either of them. Sarah had signed the papers without reading them carefully, trusting her husband completely. She had no idea that David had structured the policy to pay out the full amount only in the event of her death, with himself as the sole beneficiary. Now, as David stared at helicopter tour websites in the darkness of his office, he finalized the details of his plan. The helicopter company he had chosen operated scenic flights over dense Appalachian forest areas with minimal road access. If Sarah were to fall during the flight, it would take search and rescue teams days to locate her body, if they found it at all. By then, any evidence of foul play would be impossible to detect. David closed his laptop and headed upstairs, pausing in the doorway of their bedroom to watch Sarah sleep. She lay on her side, one hand resting on her pregnant belly, looking peaceful and beautiful. For just a moment, a flicker of doubt crossed his mind. This was the woman who had loved him unconditionally for 3 years, who had supported his entrepreneurial dreams even when money was tight, who was carrying his child. But then he thought of Vincent Torino's cold eyes and the promise of what would happen if he did not pay his debts. He thought of the federal investigation closing in on his company and the criminal charges he would face if his fraud was discovered. He thought of Jessica waiting for him in her downtown apartment, promising him a life free from responsibility and financial pressure. Sarah stirred in her sleep, murmuring something unintelligible, and David felt his resolve harden. In less than 12 hours, he would be a widower, and all his problems would disappear with his wife's body into the wilderness below. The first sign that David's perfect facade was crumbling came on a Tuesday morning when Sarah tried to buy a crib online. She had spent weeks researching the safest, highest-rated convertible cribs, reading reviews and comparing prices with the methodical care she brought to all her decisions. When she finally found the perfect one, marked down 20% for a limited-time sale, she eagerly entered her debit card information. Declined. Sarah stared at her laptop screen in confusion. She tried again, thinking perhaps she had mistyped the card number. Declined again. Switching to their joint credit card, she entered those numbers with growing anxiety. Declined once more. Her heart began to race as she grabbed her phone and called their bank. After navigating through the automated system and waiting on hold for 15 minutes, a customer service representative finally answered. "Mrs. Carter, I see the issue," the representative said after reviewing her account. "Your checking account currently has a balance of negative $237, and your credit card is at its maximum limit of $15,000. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. Just last week, David had assured her they had over $30,000 in savings. She had seen the bank statements herself, or at least she thought she had. "There must be some mistake," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "My husband manages our finances, and he told me we had plenty of money saved." The representative was sympathetic but firm. "I'm showing multiple large withdrawals over the past month, Mrs. Carter. The most recent was yesterday for $25,000. You might want to speak with your husband about these transactions." Sarah hung up the phone with trembling hands and immediately called David, who was supposedly in a board meeting at his office. "Hey, beautiful," David answered on the second ring, his voice smooth and confident. "How's my gorgeous wife and baby doing today?" "David, we need to talk," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I tried to buy the crib today, and all our cards were declined. The bank says we're in debt and that you withdrew $25,000 yesterday. What's going on?" There was a pause that lasted just a beat too long before David responded. "Oh, that? Sorry, babe. I should have mentioned it. I had to move some funds around for a major business opportunity. It's all part of expanding Secure Chain internationally. I'll transfer money back into our personal accounts tonight." Sarah wanted to believe him, but something in his tone felt off. David had always been secretive about the details of his business, claiming she would not understand the complexities of cryptocurrency and blockchain technology. But they had never had money problems before, and the idea that he would make major financial decisions without consulting her felt wrong. $25,000 is a lot of money to move without telling me, Sarah said carefully, especially when I'm trying to prepare for the baby. I feel like I should know about these kinds of decisions. David's voice took on a slightly sharper edge. "Sarah, you know I handle all the business finances. This is exactly the kind of opportunity that's going to set our family up for life. Do you want me to pass up millions in potential profit because I forgot to mention moving some money around?" The way he said it made Sarah feel foolish for questioning him, but the uneasy feeling in her stomach persisted. "I just wish you would keep me informed about major financial decisions. We're supposed to be partners." "We are partners, baby," David said, his voice softening again. "And part of being partners means trusting each other. I trust you to handle everything related to the baby in the house, and you trust me to handle the business side of our lives. That's how we've always worked, right?" Sarah nodded, even though he could not see her. "I suppose so. I just got scared when the cards were declined. I thought maybe our accounts had been hacked or something." "I understand completely," David said. "I should have given you a heads up. Tell you what, why don't you go ahead and order that crib? Use the emergency credit card in my wallet. The account transfer will go through tonight, and everything will be back to normal tomorrow." After they hung up, Sarah found David's wallet and located the emergency credit card he had mentioned. But when she tried to use it online, this card was also declined. Now genuinely frightened, she called David back, but his phone went straight to voicemail. For the rest of the day, Sarah tried to push down her growing anxiety. She told herself that David was right, that business finances were complicated, and she did not understand all the details. But that evening, when David came home 3 hours later than usual, smelling faintly of alcohol and expensive perfume, her unease deepened. "How did the board meeting go?" Sarah asked as David hung up his suit jacket. "Great, really productive," David replied without looking at her. "We're on track for the international expansion I mentioned. Should triple our revenue within 6 months. Sarah noticed that his shirt was wrinkled and his tie was loosely knotted, as if he had hastily put his appearance back together. "You mentioned you'd transfer money back into our accounts tonight. Should I check the balance in the morning?" David paused in the act of loosening his tie. "Actually, there might be a slight delay. The international transfer protocols are more complex than I anticipated. But don't worry about it, babe. We have everything we need." That night, Sarah lay awake staring at the ceiling while David slept soundly beside her. For the first time in their 3-year marriage, she felt like a stranger was lying next to her. The man she had fallen in love with had always been transparent about their finances, even showing her their bank statements and investment portfolios during their engagement. When had that changed? When had she stopped seeing the actual numbers and started simply trusting David's word about their financial situation? Unable to sleep, Sarah quietly slipped out of bed and went to David's home office. She had never snooped through his things before, but something compelled her to look for answers. The office was meticulously organized, with filing cabinets that were always locked and a computer that required a password she did not know. But David's briefcase sat open on his desk, and Sarah could see papers scattered inside. With her heart pounding, she quietly approached and began examining the documents. What she found made her blood run cold. Credit card statements showing gambling charges to online betting sites. Bank statements revealing their savings account had been emptied weeks ago. Legal documents from something called Torino Financial Services, demanding immediate payment of outstanding debts. And most shocking of all, insurance paperwork for a life insurance policy she had never seen before. As Sarah read the insurance documents by the light of her phone, she realized the policy was for $3 million, and she was listed as the insured party. But David was the sole beneficiary. The policy had been purchased 6 months ago, shortly after Sarah had announced her pregnancy. Sarah's hands trembled as she photographed the documents with her phone. She did not understand all the legal language, but the implications were clear. If something happened to her, David would receive $3 million. As she crept back to their bedroom, Sarah's mind raced with terrible possibilities. Financial secrecy, the mounting debts, the massive insurance policy. It all painted a picture she did not want to believe. But the evidence was undeniable. Her husband was in serious financial trouble, and he had taken out a policy that would make him wealthy if she died. Sarah slipped back into bed, lying as far from David as possible, while she processed what she had discovered. Outside their bedroom window, the first hints of dawn were beginning to appear on the horizon. In just a few hours, David would suggest they take a romantic helicopter tour to celebrate their last weeks before becoming parents. And Sarah, despite her growing suspicions, would agree, never imagining that her husband was planning to push her to her death. Sarah's discovery of the insurance documents haunted her for the next 2 weeks. But David's behavior became increasingly erratic in ways that made her question her own perceptions. He alternated between being the charming, attentive husband she had married and displaying moments of cold irritability that felt like glimpses of a stranger. The threatening messages started appearing 3 days after Sarah found the financial documents. She first noticed the spray-painted words on their garage door when she came home from her prenatal yoga class on a Thursday evening. Last warning, written in bold red letters across the white surface. Sarah stood in their driveway, one hand protectively cradling her belly, staring at the vandalism in shock. Their quiet suburban neighborhood had never experienced anything like this. The Carters lived on Maple Street, where the biggest crime was usually teenagers egging houses on Halloween. When David pulled into the driveway 20 minutes later, his reaction seemed genuinely shocked and concerned. "Jesus Christ, what happened here?" he said, jumping out of his Tesla and rushing to Sarah's side. "Are you okay? Did you see who did this?" "I just got home and found it like this," Sarah said, studying David's face for any sign of deception. "Do you have any idea who might have done this? Or why?" David's jaw tightened as he stared at the graffiti. For just a moment, Sarah saw something flicker across his expression. Not surprise, but calculation. Then his concerned husband mask slipped back into place. "Probably just random vandalism," he said, pulling out his phone. "I'll call the police and get this cleaned up tomorrow. The important thing is that you and the baby are safe." But Sarah had caught that momentary slip, and it confirmed her growing suspicions that David knew more about their situation than he was admitting. The police report was filed by Officer Janet Mills, a family friend who had taught Sunday school with Sarah's mother. Officer Mills took photos of the graffiti and asked routine questions about enemies or business disputes. But David maintained that he could not think of anyone who might want to threaten them. "Could be gang initiation," Officer Mills suggested. "Sometimes kids from the city drive out to the suburbs to cause trouble. We'll increase patrols in your neighborhood for the next few weeks." After Officer Mills left, David insisted they go out for dinner at Sarah's favorite Italian restaurant. "We shouldn't let some punk kids ruin our evening," he said, wrapping his arms around her. "Besides, you've been stressed about the baby preparations. A nice dinner out will help you relax." During dinner, David was the perfect husband again. Attentive, funny, asking about her day and discussing baby names with enthusiasm. He even surprised her by pulling out a small wrapped box. "I know money's been tight lately with the business transitions," he said as Sarah unwrapped a delicate silver necklace with a pendant shaped like a tiny footprint. "But I wanted you to have something special to mark this time in our lives." Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she examined the beautiful necklace. "David, it's gorgeous, but you said we needed to be careful about spending money right now." "Some things are more important than money," David replied, leaning across the table to fasten the necklace around her neck. "You're carrying our child, Sarah. You deserve to feel treasured." For a moment, Sarah allowed herself to believe that her suspicions were unfounded. This was the man she had fallen in love with. Thoughtful, generous, devoted to their growing family. Maybe the financial stress was just temporary, and the insurance policy was exactly what David claimed: protection for their family's future. But her doubts returned 2 days later when she decided to surprise David with lunch at his office. Secure Chain Technologies occupied a sleek, modern building in downtown Maplewood's small business district. Sarah had only visited a few times during their marriage, usually for company holiday parties or special events. David always claimed he preferred to keep his work and personal life separate, which Sarah had respected. Using the key card David had given her for emergencies, Sarah entered the building and took the elevator to the third floor, where Secure Chain's offices were located. She carried a bag from David's favorite sandwich shop and planned to surprise him with a romantic lunch date. But when the elevator doors opened, Sarah found herself facing a scene that shattered her remaining illusions about her husband's honesty. The Secure Chain offices were nearly empty. Where there should have been bustling activity and the hum of a successful startup, Sarah found only a few scattered desks, outdated computers, and boxes stacked along the walls as if the company was in the process of moving out. Tyler Brooks, David's business partner, and the only other person Sarah could see, looked up from his desk with an expression of surprise and something that might have been pity. "Sarah," Tyler said, standing up awkwardly, "I didn't expect to see you here. Is everything okay?" "I brought David lunch," Sarah said slowly, looking around the nearly empty office space. "Where is everyone? What happened to all the employees?" Tyler's face fell, and Sarah could see him calculating how much truth to reveal. Tyler had always been the more honest of David's business associates, and Sarah had liked him during the few times they had interacted at company events. "Sarah, I think you should talk to David about this," Tyler said carefully. "I don't feel comfortable discussing company business without him here." But Sarah was no longer willing to accept evasive answers. Her pregnancy had made her more assertive, more willing to demand the truth when something felt wrong. "Tyler, I'm David's wife," she said firmly. "I have a right to know what's happening with the company that's supposed to be supporting our family. Where are all the employees? Why are there moving boxes everywhere?" Tyler looked genuinely uncomfortable as he glanced toward David's corner office. "He's not here right now. He said he was meeting with potential investors, but—" Tyler's voice trailed off as he seemed to wrestle with his conscience. "But what?" Sarah pressed. Tyler sighed heavily. "Sarah, the company has been in serious financial trouble for months. We've had to lay off most of our staff because we can't make payroll. The investors David claims to be meeting with stopped returning his calls weeks ago. We're probably going to have to file for bankruptcy within the next month." The sandwich bag slipped from Sarah's fingers as the implications of Tyler's words sank in. "Bankruptcy? But David told me the company was expanding internationally. He said you were about to triple your revenue." "I wish that were true," Tyler said sadly. "But the cryptocurrency market crash wiped out most of our clients' investments. We're facing multiple lawsuits, and the Securities and Exchange Commission has opened an investigation into our business practices." Sarah felt the room spinning around her as she processed this information. If Secure Chain was bankrupt, then David had been lying to her about everything. Their financial problems were not temporary business transitions. They were facing complete financial ruin. "How long has David known about this?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Tyler hesitated, clearly torn between loyalty to his business partner and sympathy for Sarah. "Sarah, you really need to have this conversation with David. But if you're asking when we first realized the company was in serious trouble, it's been at least 4 months. 4 months. That meant David had known they were facing bankruptcy when Sarah got pregnant, when he purchased the life insurance policy, when he started making excuses about their missing savings. "Tyler, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me," Sarah said, looking directly into his eyes. "Has David mentioned anything about life insurance, or about what would happen to me if something happened to me?" Tyler's face went pale, and Sarah knew she had hit on something significant. "What kind of question is that, Sarah? Why would you ask about something like that?" "Please, Tyler, I found some documents at home, and I'm starting to piece together some very frightening possibilities. If you know something that could put me or my baby in danger, you have to tell me." Tyler stared at her for a long moment, clearly wrestling with a decision that could destroy his friendship with David and potentially put Sarah in even more danger. "I think you should go home and talk to David," Tyler finally said. "But Sarah, If you ever feel like you're in danger, call me immediately. Promise me." Tyler wrote his personal cell phone number on a piece of paper and pressed it into Sarah's hand. As she left the empty offices of Secure Chain Technologies, Sarah realized that her worst fears were probably just the beginning of the truth. David was not just in financial trouble, he was desperate, and desperate men with $3 million insurance policies were capable of unthinkable acts. That evening, when David came home at nearly midnight, Sarah pretended to be asleep, but through barely open eyes, she watched him move around their bedroom with the careful movements of someone trying not to wake a sleeping person. As David undressed in the darkness, Sarah noticed something that made her blood run cold. His shirt and pants reeked of cigarette smoke, even though David had never smoked. More disturbing, she could see what looked like scratches on his forearms, as if he had been in some kind of physical altercation. When David slipped into bed beside her, Sarah held her breath and remained perfectly still. But her mind was racing with terrible possibilities. Where had David been until midnight? Who had he been with? And what kind of situation had left him with scratches on his arms? As David's breathing settled into the rhythm of sleep, Sarah made a decision that would ultimately save her life. Tomorrow she would start documenting everything. David's lies, the missing money, the insurance policy, and any other evidence she could find. If David was planning to hurt her, she needed proof. And if something happened to her, she needed to leave a trail that would lead investigators to the truth. Sarah had no way of knowing that in less than 72 hours, David would suggest they take a romantic helicopter tour over the mountains, or that he was already researching the exact spot where he planned to push her to her death. But her growing suspicions and her decision to gather evidence would prove to be the difference between becoming a victim and becoming a survivor. Sarah's mother, Margaret Williams, died on a rainy Wednesday morning in a head-on collision with a drunk driver on Highway 37, exactly 3 weeks before David's planned helicopter tour. The call came at 6:15 in the morning while Sarah was getting ready for school, and her world collapsed in an instant. Margaret had been Sarah's anchor, her closest confidant, and the one person who might have seen through David's carefully constructed lies. At 62, she was still vibrant and active, working as a librarian at the county library and volunteering at the animal shelter on weekends. She had been planning to take early retirement when the baby was born so she could help with childcare. More importantly, Margaret had been the only person in Sarah's life who had ever expressed reservations about David. Nothing overt or accusatory, just subtle comments about how quickly their relationship had moved and gentle suggestions that Sarah should maintain some financial independence even after marriage. "I just think it's important for women to know where their money is and how it's being managed," Margaret had said during one of their weekly lunch dates. "Not because I don't trust David, but because knowledge is power, sweetheart." Now Margaret was gone, and Sarah was utterly alone in the world except for David. The funeral was a blur of tears, casseroles from church friends, and the suffocating presence of grief that made it hard to breathe. David played his role perfectly, serving as pallbearer, delivering a touching eulogy about Margaret's kindness, and supporting Sarah through her devastating loss. To the outside world, David Carter appeared to be the ideal son-in-law, stepping up to handle funeral arrangements and comfort his pregnant wife during the worst time of her life. The local newspaper even ran a photo of David holding Sarah as she sobbed at the graveside, with a caption praising his devotion during their family's tragedy. But Sarah's grief had sharpened her instincts rather than dulling them. Even through her emotional devastation, she noticed things about David's behavior that did not quite ring true. During the funeral planning, David had been suspiciously eager to handle all the financial arrangements himself. When the funeral director discussed costs, David immediately volunteered to pay for everything, even though Sarah had expected to use her mother's life insurance policy. "Let me take care of this, baby," David had said, squeezing Sarah's hand. "You shouldn't have to worry about money during a time like this. Your mom was like a mother to me, too." But Sarah remembered that Margaret had purchased a substantial life insurance policy specifically to cover her final expenses. When she asked David about it later, he claimed the policy had lapsed due to missed payments. "Your mom was getting a bit forgetful about bills in her last few months," David explained gently. "The insurance company sent notices, but she probably just filed them away and forgot about them. Don't worry about it. We'll handle everything." Sarah wanted to believe David's explanation, but something about it felt wrong. Her mother had been meticulous about financial matters, maintaining detailed records and never missing payments on anything important. 3 days after the funeral, while David was supposedly meeting with lawyers about Margaret's estate, Sarah drove to her mother's house to begin the painful process of sorting through her belongings. Margaret's small ranch home on Pine Street was exactly as Sarah remembered, immaculately clean, with everything in its proper place. Her mother's desk in the living room was organized with military precision, bills sorted by due date, important documents filed alphabetically. Sarah found her mother's insurance paperwork in the first file folder she opened. The life insurance policy was current, with premiums paid through the end of the year. According to the documentation, the policy was worth $50,000 with Sarah listed as the beneficiary. David had lied about the lapsed policy, but Sarah could not understand why. $50,000 would have more than covered the funeral expenses, leaving money left over to help with baby preparations. Why would David insist on paying for everything himself when Margaret had planned for this situation? As Sarah continued searching through her mother's papers, she found something even more disturbing. Hidden in the back of Margaret's desk drawer was a manila envelope marked, "For Sarah in case of emergency." Inside the envelope, Sarah found copies of articles her mother had printed from the internet about cryptocurrency fraud, business bankruptcies, and warning signs of financial abuse in marriages. There were also handwritten notes in her mother's careful script, documenting conversations with David that had apparently raised red flags. One note, dated just 6 weeks before Margaret's death, read, "David called today asking about Sarah's trust fund from her father's estate. Seemed surprised when I told him there was no trust fund. Asked very specific questions about Sarah's inheritance potential. Something felt wrong about the conversation." Another note, dated 2 weeks later, "Saw David at casino in West Virginia last weekend. He was at high-stakes poker table, looked very stressed, did not see me. Should I tell Sarah?" The final note, written just 3 days before the accident, was the most chilling. "Tyler Brooks called me, very upset about something related to David's business. Wouldn't give details but said Sarah might be in danger. Told him to call police if he has evidence. Need to talk to Sarah soon." Sarah's hands trembled as she read her mother's notes. Margaret had been investigating David, documenting her suspicions, and trying to protect her daughter. The timing of Margaret's death, just as she was preparing to confront Sarah with evidence of David's deception, seemed too convenient to be coincidental. Had Margaret's accident really been an accident? Sarah photographed every document with her phone, including her mother's handwritten notes and the current life insurance policy. As she prepared to leave her mother's house, she made a decision that would prove crucial to her survival. She would not tell David about what she had found. Instead, she would continue gathering evidence, while pretending to be the grieving, vulnerable widow who needed her husband's protection and support. That evening, David suggested they have a quiet dinner at home and talk about their future. He cooked Sarah's favorite meal, chicken parmesan with garlic bread, and opened a bottle of sparkling grape juice to toast Margaret's memory. "Your mom would want us to focus on the future," David said softly, raising his glass. "She would want us to create beautiful memories for our baby, to celebrate life even in the midst of loss." Sarah nodded and smiled, playing the role of the trusting wife, while her mind cataloged every word for potential evidence. "I've been thinking," David continued, "maybe we should take that baby moon trip we talked about. Something special to honor your mom's memory and celebrate our last weeks before the baby comes." "What did you have in mind?" Sarah asked, though her heart was already racing with dread. "That helicopter tour over the mountains," David said, his eyes bright with enthusiasm that felt predatory rather than loving. "Your mom always said the Appalachian Mountains look like God's cathedral. We could scatter some of her ashes up there, take pictures for the baby, make it a really meaningful experience." Sarah had never told David that her mother said anything about mountains looking like God's cathedral. In fact, Margaret had been afraid of heights and would never have suggested a helicopter tour for any reason. David was putting words in her dead mother's mouth to manipulate Sarah into agreeing to the helicopter trip. "That sounds beautiful," Sarah said, forcing enthusiasm into her voice. "When were you thinking?" "Next weekend," David replied. "I already checked, and the weather forecast looks perfect. Clear skies, minimal wind. It'll be safe and romantic." As David continued talking about the helicopter tour, describing the scenic route and the perfect photo opportunities, Sarah realized she was listening to her husband plan her murder. He had been working toward this moment for months, isolating her from her support system, creating massive financial pressure that would be solved by her death, and now eliminating the one person who might have protected her. Margaret's death had been the final piece of David's plan. Whether her accident had been genuinely accidental or something more sinister, it had cleared the way for David to proceed without interference. That night, Sarah lay awake beside her sleeping husband, her mind racing with plans for survival. She could not go to the police without concrete evidence of David's intentions. She could not run away without putting herself and her unborn child at even greater risk. But she could prepare for the helicopter trip in ways that David would never expect. She could document everything, leave a trail of evidence, and find ways to increase her chances of survival if David attempted to push her from the aircraft. As the first light of dawn crept through their bedroom windows, Sarah made a promise to her unborn child and to her mother's memory. David Carter would not succeed in his plan to murder them. She would survive, and she would make sure the truth came to light. In exactly 6 days, David would try to push her from a helicopter over the densest forest in the Appalachian Mountains. But Sarah would be ready for him. The morning of the helicopter tour dawned crisp and clear, with the kind of brilliant blue sky that photographers dream about. Sarah stood at her bedroom window, watching the sunrise paint the horizon in shades of gold and pink, and tried to calm the terror that had been building in her chest for days. She had spent the week preparing for this moment in ways that David could never have anticipated. Hidden in her purse was a small digital recorder, borrowed from her classroom supplies, set to record continuously for up to 6 hours. She had written a detailed letter explaining her suspicions about David, sealed it in an envelope, and left it with Tyler Brooks along with copies of all the evidence she had gathered. Most importantly, she had activated every tracking feature on her smartphone and shared her location with Tyler, giving him strict instructions to contact police if she did not check in by evening. David was in an unusually good mood as they prepared for their departure, humming while he showered and chatting cheerfully about the scenic views they would see. To anyone watching, he appeared to be an excited husband treating his pregnant wife to a romantic adventure. "You're going to love this, baby," David said as he helped Sarah into his Tesla for the drive to the helicopter landing pad. "The tour company said the autumn colors are at their absolute peak right now. We'll get some incredible photos for the baby book." Sarah smiled and nodded, playing her role as the trusting wife while mentally reviewing the survival techniques she had researched online. If David tried to push her from the helicopter, her only chance would be to grab onto something solid and hold on until the pilot could land safely. The helicopter landing pad was located at a small private airfield 30 minutes outside of Maplewood. As they drove through the winding mountain roads, Sarah noticed that David kept checking his watch and glancing at his phone, as if he was coordinating with someone or following a specific timeline. "Are you nervous about flying?" Sarah asked, though she suspected David's anxiety had nothing to do with a fear of heights. "Just excited," David replied, but Sarah could see sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool morning air. "I want everything to be perfect for you." When they arrived at the airfield, Sarah was surprised by how isolated the location felt. There were no other customers waiting for tours, no bustling activity that might provide witnesses to whatever David had planned. The landing pad sat at the edge of a dense forest, with the nearest road disappearing into the trees. Their pilot was Jake Morrison, a weathered man in his 50s who had been flying helicopter tours for over 20 years. He greeted them warmly, but Sarah noticed that David seemed nervous around Jake, as if he was concerned about what the pilot might observe or remember. "Beautiful day for flying," Jake said as he conducted his pre-flight safety briefing. "We'll be flying over some of the most spectacular mountain scenery in the region. The route takes us over Eagles Canyon, which is one of the deepest gorges in the Appalachians." Sarah listened carefully to Jake's safety instructions, paying particular attention to the location of emergency equipment and the procedures for emergency landings. She noticed that David seemed distracted during the briefing, his eyes repeatedly moving to the helicopter's doors and window latches. As they prepared to board the aircraft, David insisted that Sarah sit on the right side of the helicopter, claiming it would give her the best views of the mountains. But Sarah had researched the flight path online and knew that the most scenic views would actually be on the left side. David wanted her positioned near the door he would later try to push her through. The helicopter was a small four-seat aircraft with Sarah and David in the back seats and Jake in the pilot's position. As they lifted off, Sarah was genuinely awed by the breathtaking views spreading out below them. Rolling hills covered in autumn foliage stretched to the horizon, painted in brilliant reds, oranges, and golds that looked almost too beautiful to be real. For the first 20 minutes of the flight, David played his role perfectly. He pointed out landmarks, took photos of Sarah with the mountains in the background, and made loving comments about sharing this experience with their unborn child. But as they approached Eagles Canyon, Sarah noticed David's behavior becoming more focused and intense. He kept checking his watch and scanning the landscape below, as if looking for specific landmarks. His hand moved casually toward the door latch, testing it in a way that might have seemed innocent to a casual observer. "Jake, could you tell us about that canyon down there?" David asked, his voice carefully casual. "It looks incredibly deep." Jake's voice came through their headsets as he banked the helicopter for a better view. "That's Eagles Canyon, one of the most remote areas in this part of the mountains. The canyon is over 800 feet deep, and the forest down there is so dense that hikers sometimes get lost for days. Search and rescue teams have a tough time operating in that terrain." Sarah's blood ran cold as she realized David had specifically requested information about the remoteness of the area and the difficulty of conducting rescue operations. This was not casual conversation. David was confirming that this was the perfect location to dispose of her body. As Jake continued his commentary about the geological features of the canyon, David's hand closed around the door handle. Sarah could see his knuckles turning white with tension, and she knew the moment she had been dreading was about to arrive. "Sarah, lean forward and look at this view," David said, his voice carrying a strange note of finality. "You'll want to get a picture of this for the baby." Sarah's training as a teacher had given her excellent instincts for reading people's intentions, and every alarm bell in her mind was screaming danger. David's body language, his tone of voice, and the predatory focus in his eyes all indicated that he was about to strike. "Actually, I'm feeling a bit dizzy," Sarah said, deliberately leaning back in her seat instead of forward toward the door. "Could we maybe take pictures from this angle instead?" She could see frustration flicker across David's face as his carefully planned scenario began to deviate from script. But he quickly recovered, his charming mask sliding back into place. "Of course, baby, but you really should see this view. It's once in a lifetime." David's hand was now openly gripping the door handle, and Sarah could see him calculating angles and distances. Jake was focused on flying the helicopter and providing commentary through the headset, unaware of the deadly drama unfolding behind him. Sarah knew she had only seconds to act. Her digital recorder was capturing everything, but that would only matter if she survived to present it as evidence. "David," she said clearly, making sure her voice would be picked up by both the recorder and Jake's headset microphone. "Why do you keep checking the door handle? You're making me nervous." The question caught David off guard, and for just a moment his mask slipped completely. Sarah saw naked rage flash across his face, followed by cold calculation. "I'm just making sure it's secure, baby," he said, but his voice had lost its warmth. "We want to be safe up here." But Sarah had seen the truth in that unguarded moment, and she knew David was about to make his move. She gripped her seat harness with both hands and braced herself for the fight of her life. David's attack, when it came, was swift and brutal. With one violent motion, he released the door latch and grabbed Sarah's arm, trying to push her toward the opening. "David, no!" Sarah screamed, her voice carrying clearly through the helicopter's communication system. Jake immediately began turning around, startled by the commotion, but David was already committed to his plan. With desperate strength born of months of planning and financial pressure, he continued trying to force Sarah through the door opening. Sarah fought back with everything she had, clinging to her seat harness and kicking at David's hands. But she was 7 months pregnant, strapped into a moving aircraft, and fighting against a man who was willing to kill her for money. As the ground rushed past 800 feet below, Sarah realized that her survival would depend not just on her own strength, but on exposing David's true nature to the one witness who could tell the world what really happened. "Jake, Ifuri," she screamed into her headset microphone. "David is trying to push me out. This isn't an accident. He's trying to murder me." The words that would ultimately save Sarah's life and destroy David's carefully planned alibi echoed through the helicopter's communication system as the struggle for survival reached its terrifying climax. The moment Sarah felt herself being pushed through the helicopter door, time seemed to slow into crystalline clarity. She could see every detail with impossible sharpness. The brown and gold patchwork of autumn forest spreading endlessly below. David's face twisted with murderous determination, and Jake's shocked expression as he tried to comprehend what was happening behind him. Sarah's teacher training had included basic first aid and emergency response, but nothing could have prepared her for the reality of falling through empty air at 800 feet above ground. The wind ripped past her face with deafening intensity, drowning out her screams and making it impossible to breathe. But even as terror overwhelmed her rational mind, Sarah's survival instincts kicked in with fierce determination. This was not just about her own life. She was fighting for her unborn child, for the future David was trying to steal from them both. As she tumbled through the air, Sarah managed to activate the emergency beacon on her phone, a feature she had researched and programmed during her week of preparation. The beacon would transmit her GPS coordinates to emergency services even if she was unconscious or unable to call for help. The forest canopy rushed up to meet her with terrifying speed. But instead of the instant death David had planned, Sarah crashed through layer after layer of dense pine branches. Each impact was agony, branches tearing her clothes, scraping her skin, and jolting her body with bone-jarring force. But each branch also slowed her descent, turning what should have been a fatal fall into something she might possibly survive. Her final landing was in a thick tangle of undergrowth and fallen logs, the natural debris acting like a primitive crash pad. Sarah's left arm snapped with an audible crack, and sharp pains stabbed through her ribs with every breath. Blood seeped from countless cuts and scrapes, and her vision swam with the effects of shock and trauma. But she was alive. Against all odds and David's carefully researched statistics, Sarah Williams Carter had survived an 800-foot fall from a helicopter. The first thing she did, even through the haze of pain and disorientation, was check on her baby. With trembling fingers, she managed to activate the fetal heartbeat monitor app on her cracked but functional phone. The seconds stretched like hours as the app searched for a signal. Then, faint but unmistakable, came the steady rhythm of her baby's heartbeat. The sound brought tears of relief that mixed with the blood on her cheeks. Her child had survived the fall as well. Above the forest canopy, David was delivering the performance of his life. As Jake frantically radioed for emergency services, David sobbed convincingly into his hands, his voice cracking with apparent grief. "She was trying to get a better picture," he cried to the pilot. "She unbuckled her harness and leaned too far out. I tried to grab her, but the door wasn't secured properly. Oh God, my wife, my baby." Jake's face was pale with shock as he fought to control the helicopter and coordinate with ground rescue teams. "Sir, search and rescue teams are responding. The forest canopy might have broken her fall. People have survived worse. We're going to find her." But David knew the statistics he had researched so obsessively. No one survived an 800-foot fall into dense forest. Sarah and their unborn child were dead, and soon he would be collecting $3 million in life insurance money. "We have to land and search for her," David said, maintaining his performance as the desperate husband. "I can't just leave her down there." Jake was already looking for a safe landing spot, but the dense forest offered few options. "The nearest clearing is about 2 miles from where she fell. We'll land there and guide the rescue teams to the location." As the helicopter began its descent, David felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. His plan had worked perfectly. In front of a credible witness, Sarah had accidentally fallen from the helicopter while trying to take photographs. David's story would be that he had tried desperately to save her, but failed due to equipment malfunction. The insurance company would have no choice but to pay out the full $3 million, especially with Jake's testimony about the accidental nature of Sarah's fall. Within weeks, David would be debt-free and starting a new life with Jessica, his beautiful young mistress who knew nothing about his crimes. But deep in the forest below, Sarah was fighting for survival with every ounce of strength she possessed. Using broken branches as makeshift splints, she bound her fractured arm as best she could manage. Every movement was agony, but she forced herself to stay conscious and alert. Her phone's battery was at 20%, but the emergency beacon was still transmitting her exact location to rescue services. Sarah had also managed to send a text message to Tyler Brooks with her GPS coordinates in a brief message. David pushed me. Find the evidence. The autumn afternoon was growing cold, and Sarah knew she was going into shock from blood loss and trauma. But she had advantages that David had not counted on in his research. Her emergency beacon was leading rescuers directly to her location, eliminating the days of searching that David had factored into his plan. More importantly, Sarah's preparation and quick thinking had ensured that there would be evidence of David's true intentions. The digital recorder in her purse had captured the entire attack, including David's attempts to push her and her clear statements that this was not an accident. As helicopter rotors thundered overhead and voices began calling her name through the forest, Sarah felt a fierce surge of vindication. David had underestimated her intelligence, her preparation, and her will to survive. She was not going to be his victim. She was going to be his downfall. When the first search and rescue technician rappelled down through the trees and found her conscious and responsive, his shout of triumph echoed through the forest. "We've got her! She's alive! Prep the medical team!" As they carefully lifted Sarah on a rescue stretcher up through the forest canopy, she caught a glimpse of the sky where her nightmare had begun. Somewhere in that blue expanse, David was probably still playing the grieving husband, never suspecting that his intended victim was about to become the key witness in his own murder trial. The helicopter that carried Sarah to safety was different from the one that had nearly been her death. This time, she was surrounded by people fighting to save her life instead of end it. And this time, she had evidence that would ensure David Carter would never hurt anyone again. As they flew toward Mercy General Hospital, Sarah whispered a promise to her unborn child. "Daddy tried to hurt us, but we're going to be okay, and we're going to make sure he can never hurt anyone else." The nightmare was far from over, but Sarah Williams Carter was no longer a victim. She was a survivor with a story to tell and evidence to prove it. Detective Maria Santos had been investigating suspicious deaths and attempted murders for 15 years, but something about the helicopter incident felt wrong from the moment she arrived at the landing site. David Carter's story was too polished, too convenient, and his emotional responses seemed calculated rather than genuine. While David continued his performance as the devastated husband for local news crews, Detective Santos was methodically examining every piece of evidence from the scene. Jake Morrison, the helicopter pilot, had been visibly shaken by the incident and was eager to cooperate with investigators. "I've been flying tours for 20 years, Jake told Detective Santos as they reviewed his flight logs. "I've never had a passenger fall out of my aircraft. The safety protocols are foolproof if people follow them." Detective Santos studied Jake's face carefully. "Walk me through exactly what happened from your perspective. Don't leave out any details, even if they seem insignificant." Jake's account painted a disturbing picture that contradicted David's version of events. "Mrs. Carter seemed nervous about the flight from the beginning," Jake explained, "but Mr. Carter was very insistent about the seating arrangement. He specifically wanted her on the right side of the aircraft, claiming it would give her better views. Is that accurate? Would the right side have better views?" Jake shook his head. "Actually, the most scenic parts of our route are visible from the left side. I found it odd that he was so specific about the seating when he seemed to have the geography wrong." Detective Santos made notes as Jake continued his account. Then there was the conversation about Eagles Canyon. Mr. Carter asked very specific questions about how remote the area was and how difficult it would be for rescue teams to operate there. At the time, I thought he was just curious, but looking back, what happened immediately before Mrs. Carter fell? Jake's face grew troubled. "That's what's been bothering me. I heard her scream, but it wasn't like someone who was accidentally falling. It was pure terror, like someone was attacking her. When I turned around, I saw Mr. Carter sitting calmly in his seat, and she was gone. Did you see him try to help her? Any indication that he attempted to prevent her fall?" "That's just it," Jake said, his voice growing more certain. "Most people would have been leaning out the door, screaming her name, trying to see where she fell. But he just sat there telling me it was an accident." His immediate response was to control the narrative rather than to look for his wife. While Detective Santos was building her case against David, Tyler Brooks was racing to Mercy General Hospital with evidence that could prove Sarah's survival claims. He had spent the past week secretly recording David's conversations and documenting his business partner's increasingly erratic behavior. Tyler burst into the hospital waiting room where David was maintaining his grieving husband act for gathered reporters and family friends. News crews had been drawn by the dramatic story of a pregnant woman's miraculous survival from a helicopter fall. "David," Tyler called out, his voice sharp with urgency, "I need to talk to you privately, now." David's face went pale, but he maintained his composure in front of the cameras. "Tyler, this isn't the time. My wife is fighting for her life." "Yes, she is," Tyler replied grimly, his voice carrying clearly in the quiet waiting room. "Fighting for her life because you tried to kill her." The accusation hung in the air like a thunderclap. Nearby reporters immediately perked up, sensing a much bigger story than they had originally anticipated. David tried to pull Tyler aside for a private conversation, but Tyler was done protecting his business partner's secrets. "I have recordings, David," Tyler announced loud enough for everyone to hear. "Hours of conversations where you discuss killing Sarah for the insurance money. I know about your gambling debts, the loan sharks, the threats from Vincent Torino's organization." David's carefully maintained mask began to crack as the reality of his situation became clear. Tyler had been documenting everything, gathering evidence that could destroy David's alibi and expose his true motives. "Tyler, you're obviously under stress," David said, trying to regain control of the situation. "The company's financial problems have been difficult for all of us. But that doesn't mean—" "Don't," Tyler interrupted. "I heard you planning this, David. I heard you researching helicopter accidents and discussing how Sarah's death would solve all your problems. I have it all recorded." Detective Santos arrived at the hospital just as Tyler was revealing the existence of recorded evidence. She had been planning to interview David about inconsistencies in his story, but Tyler's bombshell accusations provided the probable cause she needed for a more aggressive investigation. "Mr. Carter," Detective Santos said, approaching David with two uniformed officers, "I need you to come with me for questioning regarding the incident this morning." David looked around the hospital waiting room, seeing his carefully constructed world collapsing in real time. Reporters were already making phone calls to their editors. Family friends were staring at him with growing suspicion, and Tyler was openly accusing him of attempted murder. "I'm not saying anything without a lawyer," David said, the first smart decision he had made all day. "That's your right," Detective Santos replied. "But Mr. Brooks here claims to have evidence of premeditation. We'll be obtaining search warrants for your home, office, and personal devices. If you attempted to murder your wife, we will find the evidence." As David was led away for questioning, Tyler immediately sought out Dr. James Mitchell, who had been treating Sarah since her arrival at the hospital. "How is she?" Tyler asked anxiously. "Is she conscious? Can she talk?" Dr. Mitchell studied Tyler carefully, trying to determine his relationship to the patient and whether he could be trusted with medical information. "Are you family?" Dr. Mitchell asked. "I'm David's business partner, but I think David tried to kill her," Tyler said bluntly. "I have evidence that could help convict him, but I need to know if Sarah can corroborate what happened." Dr. Mitchell's expression grew grave. "Mr. Brooks, if you have evidence of attempted murder, you need to speak with Detective Santos immediately. As for Mrs. Carter's condition, she's stable but heavily sedated. She has multiple fractures, severe lacerations, and signs of trauma consistent with a significant fall. But she and the baby are going to be okay? It's nothing short of miraculous, but yes, both mother and child appear to be out of immediate danger. Mrs. Carter has been drifting in and out of consciousness, and when she's awake, she's been consistently saying the same thing." Tyler leaned forward anxiously. "What has she been saying?" Dr. Mitchell looked around to make sure they could not be overheard. "She keeps saying David pushed me. He tried to kill us. We've documented every statement she's made, thinking it might be important for legal proceedings." Tyler felt a surge of relief mixed with vindication. Sarah was alive, and she was confirming what Tyler had suspected for weeks. David Carter was not a grieving husband. He was a would-be murderer who had finally been caught. "Dr. Mitchell, I need you to keep detailed records of everything Sarah says," Tyler urged. "And I need to speak with Detective Santos about the recordings I have. Between Sarah's testimony and my evidence, we can make sure David never has the chance to hurt anyone again. As Tyler hurried off to find Detective Santos, Dr. Mitchell returned to Sarah's room where she was beginning to stir from the sedation. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then gradually becoming aware of her surroundings. "Mrs. Carter, you're safe now," Dr. Mitchell said gently. "You're in the hospital, and both you and your baby are going to be fine." Sarah's hand immediately moved to her belly, and relief flooded her face when she felt the familiar bump and detected the subtle movements of her unborn child. "David," she whispered, her voice hoarse but determined. "Where is David?" "Your husband is being questioned by police," Dr. Mitchell said carefully. "There are some questions about what happened during your flight." Sarah's eyes sharpened with focus as the events of the morning came flooding back. "He pushed me," she said clearly. "David opened the helicopter door and pushed me out. He tried to murder me and our baby for insurance money." Dr. Mitchell nodded and made notes in Sarah's chart. "Mrs. Carter, Detective Santos is here and would like to speak with you when you feel strong enough. There's also a man named Tyler Brooks who says he has evidence that supports your account." For the first time since her fall, Sarah felt a spark of hope. Tyler had come forward with evidence, which meant she was not facing David's lies alone. The truth was going to come out, and justice might actually be possible. "I want to talk to them," Sarah said, her voice growing stronger. "I want to tell them everything David did, and I want to make sure he can never hurt anyone else." As Dr. Mitchell prepared to contact Detective Santos, Sarah closed her eyes and whispered a prayer of gratitude. She had survived David's attempt to murder her baby was safe, and now the wheels of justice were beginning to turn. David Carter had underestimated his wife's strength and his business partner's conscience. Those miscalculations were about to cost him everything. Tyler Brooks sat across from Detective Santos in a sterile conference room at Mercy General Hospital, his laptop open and a manila folder filled with printed documents spread across the table. For weeks, Tyler had been wrestling with his conscience about David's increasingly erratic behavior, but hearing Sarah's terrified screams over the helicopter's communication system had finally pushed him to action. "I should have come forward sooner," Tyler said, his hands trembling slightly as he queued up the first audio recording. "I knew David was in serious financial trouble, but I never imagined he would actually try to kill Sarah." Detective Santos adjusted her headphones as Tyler played the recordings he had secretly made over the past month. David's voice, clear and unmistakable, filled the small room with chilling confessions of his criminal plans. "The insurance policy is perfect," David's recorded voice said during a conversation with an unknown associate. $3 million, and Sarah has no idea she's worth more to me dead than alive. The pregnancy actually works in my favor. Grieving widower with an unborn child gets maximum sympathy." Detective Santos made detailed notes as the recordings continued, each one more damning than the last. Tyler had documented David's conversations with loan sharks, his desperate attempts to hide the company's bankruptcy, and most shocking of all, his research into methods for staging accidental deaths. "This recording was made just 3 days ago," Tyler explained as he played another file. "David was talking to Vincent Torino, the loan shark who's been threatening him. Listen to what David says about solving his Sarah problem." David's voice came through the speakers with cold calculation. "After this weekend, the Sarah situation will be permanently resolved. Helicopter accident over remote forest terrain. Very tragic, but these things happen. Insurance pays out within 30 days, and I'll have your money plus interest." Detective Santos looked up from her notes with grim satisfaction. "Mr. Brooks, this is exactly the kind of evidence we need to prove premeditation. Combined with the pilot's testimony and Mrs. Carter's account, this makes our case practically airtight." But Tyler was not finished. He opened his laptop and began showing Detective Santos the digital evidence he had gathered. David's browser history showing research into helicopter accidents, email communications with the tour company requesting specific flight routes over remote areas, and most damning of all, David's recent communications with his mistress about starting a new life together. "David has been planning this for months," Tyler explained. "The helicopter tour wasn't a spontaneous romantic gesture. It was a carefully planned execution method. He chose that specific route because it flies over the most remote wilderness area in the region." Detective Santos studied the evidence with growing amazement. Mr. Brooks, why didn't you come forward earlier? This level of premeditation could have been stopped. Tyler's face flushed with shame and regret. David is my business partner and my friend, or at least I thought he was. I kept telling myself there had to be another explanation for his behavior. I thought maybe the stress of the company's financial problems was making him say things he didn't really mean. What changed your mind? Two things, Tyler replied. First, Sarah's mother called me 3 days before she died. Margaret Williams was worried about David's behavior and asked me to keep an eye on Sarah. She said David had been asking strange questions about Sarah's inheritance and life insurance. Detective Santos looked up sharply. Mrs. Williams was concerned about her daughter's safety? Very concerned. Margaret was a smart woman, and she had started noticing things that didn't add up about David's financial claims. She was planning to confront Sarah about her suspicions. You said two things changed your mind. What was the second? Tyler's expression grew dark. Yesterday, I followed David to a meeting with Vincent Torino and his associates. I heard them discussing what would happen to Sarah if David couldn't pay his debts. That's when I realized David wasn't just fantasizing about killing his wife. He was actually going to do it. Detective Santos closed her notebook and leaned back in her chair. Mr. Brooks, your evidence is going to be crucial in convicting David Carter of attempted murder. But I need to ask you something important. Do you think Margaret Williams's car accident was really an accident? Tyler had been dreading this question, but he knew he had to tell the truth. I don't know for certain, but the timing was awfully convenient for David. Margaret was the only person who might have stopped Sarah from taking that helicopter ride. With her out of the picture, Sarah had no one left to protect her. Before Detective Santos could respond, Dr. Mitchell appeared in the doorway of the conference room. Detective, Mrs. Carter is awake and asking to speak with you, he said. She's weak but determined to give her statement while the details are still fresh. Detective Santos gathered her materials and followed Dr. Mitchell to Sarah's hospital room. Tyler accompanied them, knowing that his presence might provide comfort to Sarah as she recounted her traumatic experience. Sarah lay propped up in her hospital bed, connected to monitors that beeped steadily. Her left arm was in a cast. Her face bore multiple cuts and bruises, but her eyes were clear and focused with determination. Mrs. Carter, I'm Detective Santos, the investigator said gently. Mr. Brooks has provided us with evidence that supports your account of what happened today. When you're ready, I'd like you to tell me everything you remember about the helicopter incident. Sarah's voice was hoarse but steady as she recounted the events of the morning. She described David's unusual behavior during the flight, his specific interest in the remote canyon area, and the moment when he grabbed her and tried to push her through the helicopter door. He looked directly into my eyes when he was trying to push me out, Sarah said, her voice growing stronger with each word. There was no love there, no regret, no emotion at all. I was just an obstacle he needed to remove. Detective Santos took detailed notes as Sarah continued her account. Mrs. Carter, did your husband ever discuss life insurance with you? He told me he had purchased a policy to protect our family, Sarah replied. But I found out later that I was the only one insured, and David was the only beneficiary. If I died, he would receive $3 million. Tyler leaned forward in his chair. Sarah, I'm so sorry I didn't warn you sooner. I knew David was in trouble, but I never imagined he would actually try to hurt you. Sarah reached out with her uninjured hand to squeeze Tyler's fingers. You came forward when it mattered most. That's what saved my life. Horror. Detective Santos looked between Tyler and Sarah, mentally organizing the mountain of evidence they had provided. Mrs. Carter, there's something else I need to ask you about. Your mother's death. Did David seem unusually interested in the timing or circumstances of her accident? Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she considered the question. David insisted on handling all the funeral arrangements, even though Mom had life insurance to cover the expenses, and he seemed almost relieved that she was gone, even though he pretended to be grieving. Did your mother ever express concerns about David? Sarah nodded slowly. I found notes in Mom's house after she died. She had been documenting strange conversations with David and had even seen him gambling at a casino. She was planning to talk to me about her suspicions. Detective Santos exchanged glances with Tyler. The pattern was becoming clear. David had systematically eliminated anyone who might interfere with his plan to murder Sarah. Margaret Williams's death, whether accidental or intentional, had removed the last obstacle to David's scheme. "Mrs. Carter, I want you to know that we have overwhelming evidence of your husband's premeditation," Detective Santos said. "Mr. Brooks has provided recordings of David planning your murder, and the helicopter pilot's testimony contradicts David's claims about what happened during the flight." For the first time since her fall, Sarah felt a genuine sense of relief. The truth was coming out, and David would face consequences for his actions. "What happens now?" Sarah asked. "David is in custody and will be formally charged with attempted murder," Detective Santos replied. "With the evidence we have, I'm confident we can secure a conviction and ensure he never has the opportunity to hurt you or anyone else again." As Detective Santos prepared to leave, Sarah made one final request. "I want to confront David. I want him to know that his plan failed and that I survived to tell the truth." Tyler looked concerned. "Sarah, is that safe? David is dangerous, and seeing you alive might make him even more desperate." Detective Santos considered the request carefully. It could be arranged under controlled circumstances. Sometimes confronting an attempted murder suspect with their surviving victim can produce additional confessions or admissions. Sarah's eyes hardened with determination. "David thought he could throw me away like garbage for money. I want him to see that I'm still here, that I'm still fighting, and that his lies didn't work." The confrontation would be risky, but it might provide the final piece of evidence needed to ensure David Carter would spend the rest of his life in prison for his crimes. As plans were made for Sarah to face her would-be killer, none of them could have anticipated just how desperate and dangerous David would become when he realized his perfect plan had completely unraveled. The confrontation between Sarah and David took place in a secure interview room at the county jail, with Detective Santos and two armed guards present. Sarah had insisted on facing her would-be killer, despite the obvious risks, driven by a need to see David's reaction when he realized his plan had failed completely. David was brought into the room in handcuffs and an orange jumpsuit, his usually immaculate appearance replaced by the disheveled look of a man whose world had collapsed overnight. When he saw Sarah sitting at the metal table, very much alive and clearly prepared to testify against him, his face went through a series of expressions: shock, fear, rage, and finally cold calculation. "Hello, David," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "Surprised to see me?" David's attorney immediately leaned over to whisper urgent advice about remaining silent, but David was beyond rational decision-making. The sight of his intended victim sitting across from him, ready to destroy his carefully constructed lies, triggered the narcissistic rage that had been simmering beneath his charming exterior for years. "This is ridiculous," David said, his voice sharp with desperation. "Sarah is obviously confused from the trauma. She fell from a helicopter. Of course she's not thinking clearly. I would never hurt my wife." Detective Santos placed Tyler's digital recorder on the table between them. "Mr. Carter, we have hours of recorded conversations where you discuss killing your wife for insurance money. Would you like to hear them?" As David's own voice filled the room with damning confessions about his Sarah problem and plans for a tragic accident, his face grew pale, and his attorney frantically scribbled notes about potential plea bargains. But Sarah was not finished. She pulled out copies of the evidence she had gathered during her week of investigation. The insurance documents showing David as the sole beneficiary, the records of his gambling debts, and most damning of all, her mother's handwritten notes documenting her suspicions about David's behavior. "You killed my mother," Sarah said, her voice cutting through David's protests. "Maybe not directly, but you eliminated the one person who might have stopped me from getting on that helicopter. And then you tried to murder me and our unborn child for money." David's mask finally slipped completely. "You have no idea what kind of pressure I was under," he snarled. "Vincent Torino was going to kill both of us if I didn't pay him back. At least my way, you would have died quickly instead of slowly." The confession was exactly what Detective Santos had hoped for. David had just admitted to premeditated murder in front of multiple witnesses and recording devices. "So you're saying you tried to kill your wife to protect her?" Detective Santos asked, her voice carefully neutral. "I'm saying I was backed into a corner with no good options," David replied, his voice growing more defensive. "The life insurance money would have paid off my debts and given our child a secure future." Sarah would have died believing she was loved instead of finding out what kind of man she really married. Sarah stared at her husband in disbelief. Even now, even after being caught with overwhelming evidence, David was trying to justify attempted murder as an act of love. "You looked me in the eyes and pushed me out of that helicopter," Sarah said, her voice breaking with emotion. "You felt our baby kicking and still tried to kill us both. That's not love, David. That's evil." The confrontation ended when David's attorney finally managed to silence his client, but the damage was done. David had confessed to attempted murder in front of multiple witnesses, and his justifications only made his crimes more heinous. 3 months later, the trial of David Carter became a media sensation that gripped the nation. The courtroom was packed with reporters, true crime enthusiasts, and local residents who had been shocked by the revelation that their charming neighbor was capable of such monstrous acts. Sarah took the witness stand wearing a simple navy dress, her pregnancy now clearly visible at 8 months. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, working with prosecutors to ensure David would face the full consequences of his actions. "Mrs. Carter," the prosecutor began gently, "can you tell the court what happened on the morning of October 15th when you and your husband took a helicopter tour?" Sarah's voice was steady and clear as she recounted the events of that October morning. "My husband suggested we take a helicopter tour to celebrate our last weeks before becoming parents. He said it would be a beautiful memory to share with our child." The prosecutor guided Sarah through her testimony with careful precision. "Did anything about your husband's behavior that morning seem unusual?" "Yes," Sarah replied, her eyes never leaving the jury. "David was very specific about where I should sit in the helicopter. He insisted I take the right side, claiming it would give me better views. Later I learned that the most scenic parts of the route were actually visible from the left side." As Sarah continued her testimony, describing David's questions about the remoteness of Eagles Canyon and his positioning near the helicopter door, the courtroom remained absolutely silent. Every juror was focused on her words, understanding that they were hearing a first-hand account of attempted murder. "What happened when your husband attacked you?" the prosecutor asked. Sarah's voice remained strong despite the emotional weight of reliving her trauma. "David grabbed my arm and tried to push me through the helicopter door. When I managed to grip the doorframe, he pried my fingers loose one by one. He looked directly into my eyes as he pushed me, and I saw no love there, no regret. I was just an obstacle he needed to remove." The defense attorney's cross-examination was aggressive, but ultimately futile. He tried to suggest that Sarah's memories were confused by trauma, that the fall had affected her perception of events. But Sarah's account was corroborated by too much evidence: Tyler's recordings, Jake's testimony, and David's own confessions. Tyler Brooks took the stand next, his testimony providing crucial evidence about David's premeditation. He played the recorded conversations for the jury, David's voice filling the courtroom with chilling discussions about insurance payouts and staged accidents. "Mr. Brooks," the prosecutor asked, "in your opinion, how long had Mr. Carter been planning to kill his wife?" "Based on the evidence I gathered, at least 6 months," Tyler replied. "The life insurance policy, the research into accident statistics, the specific choice of helicopter route over remote wilderness. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was cold, calculated murder for financial gain." Jake Morrison's testimony as the helicopter pilot provided the final nail in David's coffin. His description of Sarah's terrified scream and David's calm demeanor immediately after her fall painted a picture of a man who had just successfully executed a long-planned murder attempt. "In 20 years of flying," Jake told the jury, "I've never seen a husband react so calmly to his wife's supposed accidental death. Most people would be hysterical, desperate to search for their loved one. David just sat there, ready with his story about equipment malfunction. The prosecution's case was overwhelming, but David's defense team made one last desperate attempt to save their client. They called character witnesses who testified about David's charm and apparent devotion to Sarah, trying to create reasonable doubt about his capacity for murder. But the evidence was too strong, and David's own recorded confessions too damning. When the defense rested their case, it was clear that David Carter's fate was sealed. The prosecutor's closing argument was powerful and concise. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we have presented overwhelming evidence that David Carter attempted to murder his pregnant wife for insurance money. His own words, recorded without his knowledge, prove premeditation. The pilot's testimony proves the attack occurred, and Sarah Carter's survival and testimony prove that this was not an accident, but an attempted execution. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning their verdict. Guilty on all charges of attempted murder in the first degree, conspiracy to commit murder, and insurance fraud. Judge Patricia Hawkins sentenced David to life in prison without the possibility of parole, her words echoing through the packed courtroom. Mr. Carter, your crimes represent a betrayal of the most fundamental trust between spouses. You attempted to murder your pregnant wife for money, showing a level of callousness that shocks the conscience. Society must be protected from individuals capable of such calculated evil. As David was led away in handcuffs, he turned once more toward Sarah, his eyes filled with rage rather than remorse. But Sarah did not flinch. She had survived his attempt to kill her, faced him in court, and seen justice served. Outside the courthouse, Sarah spoke to the gathered media, her message one of hope and resilience. I want other women to know that survival is possible, even when the person who's supposed to love and protect you becomes your greatest threat. Trust your instincts, document suspicious behavior, and never give up fighting for yourself and your children. Dr. Mitchell, who had treated Sarah's injuries and become an advocate for domestic violence survivors, stood beside her as she addressed the crowd. Sarah's survival is medically miraculous, but her courage in seeking justice is equally inspiring. She's transformed her trauma into a mission to help other women escape dangerous situations. Tyler Brooks, who had risked his friendship and business partnership to expose David's crimes, also spoke to reporters. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is speak up when you see something wrong. I only wish I had acted sooner to protect Sarah and her baby. As the media attention faded and the legal proceedings concluded, Sarah began the long process of rebuilding her life. She had won justice in court, but the deeper work of healing from betrayal and trauma would take much longer. 6 months after David's conviction, Sarah Williams stood in her beautifully renovated classroom at Maplewood Elementary, hanging fresh alphabet cards and arranging tiny desks for her eager students. She had reclaimed her maiden name along with her sense of identity, shedding the last vestiges of her connection to David Carter. Baby Emma Rose Williams gurgled contentedly in her carrier, watching her mother prepare for the new school year with bright, curious eyes. Born healthy and strong, just 2 months after the trial, Emma had become Sarah's greatest source of joy and motivation for the future. The classroom walls told the story of Sarah's transformation from victim to survivor to advocate. Alongside traditional educational posters were thank you letters from domestic violence survivors who had found courage in Sarah's story, photographs from speaking engagements at law enforcement conferences, and artwork from children whose mothers had escaped abusive relationships with help from Sarah's foundation. Look, sweetheart, Sarah whispered to Emma, adjusting the baby's tiny pink hat. This is where Mommy teaches. These desks will be filled with wonderful children who want to learn and grow, just like you will someday. Sarah had established the Margaret Williams Foundation for Family Safety, named in honor of her mother's memory and dedicated to protecting pregnant women and children from domestic violence. The foundation provided emergency housing, legal assistance, and counseling services to women who found themselves in situations similar to Sarah's. Dr. James Mitchell had become both a close friend and a key supporter of the foundation, donating his medical expertise and advocating for trauma-informed care for abuse survivors. Sarah has transformed her personal nightmare into a beacon of hope for other women, he often said when speaking at fundraising events. Her foundation has already saved dozens of lives by helping women recognize warning signs and escape dangerous situations. Tyler Brooks had found his own path to redemption through his role in exposing David's crimes. He had sold his share in the failed tech company and now worked as a financial investigator, specializing in cases involving domestic abuse and economic manipulation. His experience with David had taught him to recognize the warning signs of financial abuse that often preceded physical violence. Working with Sarah's foundation has shown me how abusers use money as a weapon, Tyler explained during a recent television interview. They isolate their victims financially, making it impossible for women to leave even when they recognize the danger. Our job is to help women document their situations and build independent resources. On this particular September morning, as Sarah prepared for the first day of school, she reflected on how completely her life had changed. A year ago, she had been a trusting wife, married to a man who viewed her as a disposable asset. Today, she was a confident single mother whose survival story had inspired women around the world. The bell rang, and Sarah's third-grade students began filing into the classroom with the excited energy that marked the beginning of each school year. Their innocent faces and eager questions reminded Sarah why she had fought so hard to survive and seek justice. "Good morning, everyone," Sarah said warmly as the children found their assigned seats. "Welcome to our classroom family. This year we're going to learn so many wonderful things together." As the morning progressed with introductions and getting to know you activities, Sarah marveled at the resilience of children and the hope they represented for the future. These students would grow up in a world where domestic violence was increasingly recognized and addressed, where women had more resources for escaping dangerous relationships. During her lunch break, Sarah checked her phone to find dozens of supportive messages from women around the country. Her story had reached far beyond Ohio, inspiring legislation to improve domestic violence reporting and creating networks of support for abuse survivors. One message particularly touched her heart. "I was planning to stay with my abusive husband because I was afraid I couldn't support my children alone. Your story reminded me that survival is possible and that my children deserve to see their mother strong and safe. We left yesterday, and we're staying at a shelter that helps women like us. Thank you for showing me that courage is contagious." Sarah smiled as she typed her response. "Your bravery inspires me. Keep fighting for yourself and your children. You deserve a life filled with real love and safety, and there are people ready to help you build it." As the school day ended and Sarah prepared to take Emma home, she stopped by the small memorial garden the community had created in honor of Margaret Williams. A bench surrounded by her mother's favorite flowers provided a peaceful place for reflection and remembrance. "Hi, Mom," Sarah said softly, settling onto the bench with Emma in her arms. "I wish you could meet your granddaughter. She has your curious eyes and your stubborn streak. I think you would have loved watching her grow up." Sarah had often wondered whether her mother's death had truly been accidental, or if David had somehow orchestrated it to remove the one person who might have stopped his plan. The question would probably never be answered definitively, but Sarah had found peace in honoring her mother's memory through the Foundation's work. "I hope you're proud of what we've built from this tragedy," Sarah continued, watching Emma sleep peacefully in her arms. "Your notes and documentation helped convict David, and now we're using that same attention to detail to help other women document abuse and build cases for prosecution." As the afternoon sun painted everything in golden light, Sarah made a mental inventory of all the good that had emerged from the darkest day of her life. The Foundation had helped over 200 women escape abusive relationships. Her story had inspired new legislation requiring better training for police officers responding to domestic violence calls. Most importantly, Emma would grow up knowing that her mother was a survivor who had transformed trauma into purpose. Standing to leave the memorial garden, Sarah whispered one final promise to her mother's memory. "We'll keep fighting, Mom. For Emma, for all the women who need help, and for the future you wanted us to have." The drive home took Sarah through the downtown area where David's failed company had once operated. The building now housed a nonprofit organization that provided job training and financial literacy education to domestic violence survivors. Sarah had helped arrange the purchase and renovation, ensuring that David's former office space would be used to empower women rather than exploit them. At home in the small but comfortable house she had purchased with proceeds from her book deal and speaking engagements, Sarah settled into the evening routine she had created for herself and Emma. Bath time, feeding, and gentle lullabies filled the hours before bedtime with peaceful contentment. As she rocked Emma to sleep, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The helicopter that was meant to be her grave had instead been the catalyst for her transformation from victim to survivor to advocate. David's betrayal had nearly destroyed her, but it had ultimately revealed her own unbreakable strength and capacity for resilience. "Your daddy tried to hurt us," Sarah whispered to her sleeping daughter, "but we survived, and we've used our survival to help other families stay safe. You're going to grow up knowing that women are strong, that truth matters, and that love should never, ever hurt." Emma stirred slightly in her sleep, as if responding to her mother's words, and Sarah felt overwhelmed with gratitude for the second chance they had been given. Outside their window, the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, each one a reminder of the infinite possibilities that lay ahead. Sarah Williams had fallen from the heavens and landed in hell, but she had clawed her way back to create her own version of paradise, a life built on truth, purpose, and unconditional love for her child. Her story was no longer just about a woman who was pushed from a helicopter by her husband for insurance money. It had become a testament to the power of survival, the importance of speaking truth to power, and the possibility of transforming even the darkest experiences into sources of light for others. As Sarah prepared for bed that night, she looked at the framed photo on her nightstand. Herself and Emma at the Foundation's first annual fundraising gala, surrounded by dozens of women and children whose lives had been changed by their work. The image captured everything Sarah had learned about resilience, community, and hope. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to help other families find safety and healing. But tonight, Sarah Williams was exactly where she belonged, safe at home with her daughter, surrounded by the life they had built together from the ashes of betrayal and trauma. The nightmare was over. The future stretched ahead of them, bright with promise and unmarked by the shadows of the past. 3 years later, Sarah Williams testified before Congress in support of the Family Safety Protection Act, legislation inspired by her case that would provide better resources for domestic violence survivors and improve law enforcement training. Emma, now a bright and curious toddler, sat in the gallery with Tyler Brooks and Dr. Mitchell, watching her mother make history. David Carter remained in federal prison, where he would spend the rest of his life. His appeals had been exhausted, and he had become a case study in criminal justice programs across the country as an example of calculated domestic violence and attempted murder for financial gain. The Margaret Williams Foundation had grown into a national organization with chapters in 37 states, helping thousands of women and children escape dangerous situations and rebuild their lives. Sarah's book, Falling into Light, A Survivor's Journey from Betrayal to Hope, had become a bestseller and required reading in social work and law enforcement programs. Most importantly, Emma was growing up healthy, happy, and surrounded by love in all its authentic forms. She would never know the fear her mother had experienced, never question whether she was truly valued and protected by the people who claimed to love her. Sarah's story had become more than just a tale of survival. It was proof that even in the darkest moments, when everything seems lost, the human spirit possesses an unbreakable capacity for healing, growth, and transformation. The woman who had once fallen from the sky now soared on wings of her own making, carrying other women to safety and showing the world that love should lift us up, never tear us down. If this story of survival against impossible odds grabbed your attention, hit that like button to help other people discover Sarah's incredible journey. Drop a comment below telling us what you think about David's calculated plan. Could you have seen the warning signs? Share this video with someone who believes in the power of human resilience. And don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell, because we bring you the most compelling true crime stories that prove truth really is stranger than fiction. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next in Sarah's fight for justice.